Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson, October 31st, 1905, July 7th, 1968, was an American crime boss in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City. Early life. Johnson was born in Charleston, South Carolina on October 31st, 1905, to Margaret Moultrie and William Johnson. When he was 10, his older brother Willie was accused of killing a white man. Afraid of a possible lynch mob, his parents mortgaged their tiny home to raise money to send Willie up north to live with relatives. Johnson's nickname Bumpy is derived from a bump on the back of his head. As Johnson grew older, his parents worried about his short temper and insolence towards white people, and in 1919, he was sent to live with his older sister Mabel in Harlem. Johnson dropped out of high school and began working in casual jobs. Gangster William Hewitt noticed Johnson, who began working for him, beginning his life of crime. Johnson was an associate of numbers queen Madame Stephanie St. Clair. Stephanie St. Clair was a racketeer who ran numerous enterprises in Harlem, New York, in the early 20th century. St. Clair resisted the mafia's interests for several years after Prohibition ended. She became a local legend for her public denunciations of corrupt police and for resisting mafia control. She ran a successful numbers game in Harlem and was an activist for the black community. Her nicknames included Queenie, Madam Queen, Madame St. Clair, and Queen of the Policy Rackets. Bumpy became St. Clair's principal lieutenant in the 1930s. St. Clair was involved in policy banking, which for her was a mixture of investing, gambling, and playing the lottery. Many banks at this time would not accept black customers, so they were not able to invest legally. Policy banking wasn't technically legal, but it was one of the few options offered to black Harlem residents who wished to invest their money. It was also a predominantly black industry, which allowed many bankers to have a sense of agency that would not be possible in white-dominated fields. In this way, St. Clair used the underground economy in Harlem to address race politics. At this time, the numbers game in Harlem was male-dominated, and St. Clair was one of the only women involved. She helped the black community in Harlem by providing many with jobs such as numbers runners. Part of the numbers bankers' activity was financing otherwise legitimate small businesses which took players' bets. She also helped her community by donating money to programs that promoted racial progress. Because of her success in the numbers game, she lived a lavish life, making over $20,000 per year in the 1920s. Police corruption. St. Clair was known to put out ads in the local newspapers, educating the Harlem community about their legal rights, advocating for voting rights, and calling out police brutality against the black community. Several times she complained to local authorities about harassment by the police. When they paid no heed, she ran advertisements in Harlem newspapers, accusing senior police officers of corruption. The police responded by arresting her on a trumped-up charge, and she spent 8 months in a workhouse. In response, she testified to the Seabury Commission about the kickbacks she had paid police officers and those who had participated in the Harlem numbers game. The commission subsequently fired more than a dozen police officers. After the end of Prohibition, Jewish and Italian-American crime families saw a decrease in profits and decided to move in on the Harlem gambling scene.
Casper Holstein, a black man, was one of Madame St. Clair's rival, and he brought in Dutch Schultz to help him go against Madame St. Clair and Bumpy Johnson.
Bronx-based mob boss Dutch Schultz was the first to move in, beating and killing numbers operators who would not pay him protection. St. Clair and her chief enforcer Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson refused to pay protection to Schultz, despite the violence and intimidation by police they faced. St. Clair responded by attacking the storefronts of businesses that ran Dutch Schultz's betting operations and tipping off the police about him. This resulted in the police raiding his house, arresting more than a dozen of his employees, and seizing approximately $12 million, about $1 billion in 2024 currency. St. Clair never submitted to Dutch Schultz, unlike many others in Harlem. The fight resulted in more than 40 murders and several kidnappings. After St. Clair's struggles with Schultz, she had to become legitimate and stay away from the police, so she passed on her criminal business to Johnson. Eventually, Her former enforcer negotiated with Lucky Luciano, and Lucky took over Schultz's spots, with a percentage going to Bumpy. The mafiosi then had to go to Bumpy first if they had any problems in Harlem. Luciano realized that the war in Harlem was bad for business. Schultz was fatally wounded in a shooting ordered by the Commission in 1935. St. Clair, though uninvolved in the hit, sent an infamous telegram to Schultz on his deathbed that read, "As ye sow, so shall ye reap." The telegram reportedly made headlines across the nation. By the 1940s, Johnson had become the reigning king in Harlem, and St. Clair became less and less involved in the numbers game. In 1952, Johnson's activities were reported in the Celebrity People section of Jet. That same year, Johnson was sentenced to 15 years in prison for a drug conspiracy conviction related to heroin.
Here is a picture of Bumpy Johnson with his driver and protege, Flash Walker, in 1950. Flash later turned informant and testified against Bumpy in a heroin trafficking case that sent Bumpy away for 10 years on Alcatraz.
2 years later, Jet reported in its crime section that Johnson began his sentence after losing an appeal. He served the majority of that sentence at Alcatraz Prison in San Francisco Bay, California as inmate number 1117 and was released in 1963 on parole. Johnson was arrested more than 40 times and served 2 prison terms for narcotics-related charges. In December 1965, Johnson staged a sit-down strike in a police station, refusing to leave as a protest against their continued surveillance. He was charged with refusal to leave a police station, but was acquitted by a judge. Johnson was under a federal indictment for drug conspiracy when he died of a heart attack on July 7, 1968, at the age of 62. He was at Wells Restaurant in Harlem shortly before 2 a.m., and the waitress had just served him coffee, a chicken leg, and hominy grits when he fell over clutching his chest.
One of Bumpy Johnson's top lieutenants, Jameson Junie Bird, on the left, having a night on the town with friends. Johnson died in Bird's arms at Wells Restaurant in 1968.
He is buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York City. In popular culture, Bumpy Johnson's character has been portrayed in several movies and TV shows. In an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, it is reported that Johnson allegedly helped the 3 escapees of Alcatraz get to the shores of San Francisco. It is said that he arranged for a boat to pick the 3 men up out of the bay. The boat then dropped the escapees off at Pier 13 in San Francisco's Hunters Point district.